Tales from the Polyverse. Dark System. In the beginning. Good morning, Dr. McLean. Vance, my personal virtual assistant, intoned as the lights began to brighten to day glow. Today marks the official beginning of Phase 10. We are currently 120 hours ahead of schedule. I slowly opened my eyes and glared about the room grumpily. Like all the other living quarters of Rock Point Station, my room was about the size of a standard single-occupancy hotel room. The walls and furnishings were constructed with advanced composites, ceramics, and metallics, decorated in shades of eggshell white and haze gray. Though I had spent over a year in this boring room, I hadn't bothered to personalize any of it. After all, why make a hole feel like home when it wasn't? I just wanted to go home. Pass on to the VAs of the night shift to ensure that they are ready for turnover this time. I don't want the engine tests to be delayed any more than they have to be. I groggily growled, struggling to sit at the edge of my bed. No one wants a delay any less than I, Doctor, Vance returned, almost snarkily for a computer. That would be inefficient, and a mark against my own scheduling capacity. I sat there for a moment trying to figure out if I cared about anything that the VA had said. You know you suck at humor. I finally rolled my eyes and climbed to my feet. What's the galley serving for breakfast now? The galley menu subroutine reports the following. Vance started immediately, anticipating my request like a well-programmed VA should. Eggs to order, Belgian-style waffles, sausage patties, bacon, oatmeal, fried breakfast potatoes, and cold cereal. Drink service includes fruit juices, assorted lactose, coffees, teas, and water. What about solid fruits? I queried as I dressed. This was a functioning construction port, as well as a high-tech development center. We had little need for fancy clothes, just simple garments to keep us covered and safe. As such, our uniforms consisted of black construction uniform with protective toe plates and bloused pants, a dark green t-shirt, and an overjacket, also dark green, gray, and plum, all pixelated in a weird digital camo pattern, reminiscent of a 21st century naval working uniform. Fruits are not available on Tuesdays, was the prompt response to my question. Would you like me to reserve a table for you? Sure, I struggled. I shrugged after a little thought, putting on my overjacket and wrist controls for Vance. I would also like you to order a scramble with cheese, bacon, and oatmeal with some grape juice. Now I was ready-ish to begin my day. With a sigh, I opened the passage to the corridor beyond my door. The hall was kept in perpetual day glow and was about twice the width of a hotel's hallway. It sported the same drab decor as the rooms themselves. The years of work had worn shallow ruts into the carpet. The base commander would probably be scheduling a remodel of this section soon. As one would expect, the hall was pretty near abandoned. Too early for some and not late enough for others. As I ambled to the promenade, others emerged from their domiciles and followed the path to the food. Well, Stephen, sounded the most pleasant voice in the universe from behind. Looks like you are going to get your wish after all. Finally in Phase 10. Only a week from pre-com launch. I turned with a smile on my face to look into the eyes of the only person that made Rock Point Station bearable. Stephanie was more than easy on the eyes. She was a vision of wonder. Her long strawberry blonde and wavy hair hadn't yet been wrangled into a bun or ponytail, per dress code. But we weren't working right now, so it really didn't matter. Not that I would ever report her anyway. Her amazing emerald eyes were perfectly set off by her hair and worked well with her uniform, with a figure that, though hidden by her baggy clothes, was killer. A perfect balance of full-bodied and athleticism. She was wonderful. We hugged in a friendly fashion, and I inhaled her watermelon body mist deeply and gratefully. Yeah, I just hope Ice Point Station on Apophysis moon of Ishtar is ready and won't delay us. I smiled despite myself as we stopped our embrace.
Steve, it was just a rumored Planet 9 3 years ago,
she returned as we started back towards the promenade. If we can get the trebuchet and vehicles built in...
It takes 3 years just to get to Apophis, minimum,
she chuckled at my exasperation. And they really don't have to build anything. They can stay in orbit. Even then, it's all prefab, I insisted half-heartedly. Steph, I just want to get back to Earth and breathe fresh air again. I know she was trying to comfort me, and don't get me wrong, I appreciated it like nothing else in the universe. But I was a bit neurotic. Thankfully, she not only understood, but accepted me the way I was.
Ah yes, but back on Earth, you would never get a view like this,
she indicated grandly as we entered the promenade. Rock Point was located on the protoplanet Ceres in the asteroid belt between Earth and Mars. The promenade was the central section of Rock Point. As the first and largest room of the station, it was the central muster point for all emergencies. After all, space itself was on the outside of the station. The promenade was reminiscent of a sports arena, tiered levels for sitting and planters going all the way down from the nosebleed section to a moderately sized Japanese garden at the bottom. The roof was a dome of 3 feet thick transparent aluminum with only a few supports blocking the view of the asteroid belt. The whole dome acted as kinda like a magnifier for the dark velvet beyond. Unlike many space epics of yore, asteroid fields or belts or whatever were not densely packed gauntlets of death. There was, in point of fact, vast distances where one wouldn't see more than a few astro crags at most. With the unaided eye, that is. At this time, there was only the trebuchet and launch vehicle, the Leif Erikson, in sight, and they were both at the focus of the glass. A wonder to behold both. As we gazed at the majesty of the universe, we joined hands without thinking. We strove to maintain professionalism, even though we were clearly attracted to each other. I used the excuse that we had to prove there was no favoritism, but I was just afraid of ruining our relationship as I had done with all the other women I had been with. I just couldn't stand losing such a wonderful friend. I was going to advance the relationship back on Earth. It was another reason I wanted to get back. Our gazes gradually returned to Rock Point and the gardens below.
Oh look, the orchids are in bloom,
Stephanie marveled. Steph, I sighed, warring with myself. We can stop and smell the roses after our shift. I don't want to be late again. After an internal struggle of her own, she acquiesced with a sad sigh.
You're right. I'm hungry too, and I can smell bacon.
Her vigor was somewhat restored. With the morning tedium completed, the team was finally on our way to the Erikson. My team was top-tier engineers and craftsmen. Between us, we had the capacity to diagnose and repair any problem on the Erikson or the trebuchet itself, or Rock Point for that matter. We were the ones that designed everything after all. As the engine test was one of the more dangerous aspects of the project, there had to be as few people as possible on board to monitor and confirm every aspect, hence this dream team, some of whom had already volunteered to go on the first mission, something I never wanted. Silently, the black velour of near vacuum slipped over the hull of our transport as our expert pilot staved off her boredom, born of the tedium of transit. There were only a few approved vectors to the trebuchet and the control lander itself, so it was always the same trip. While she was able to direct her attention to this minor task, the team itself had no outlet for their monotonous commute. Ugh, can this bucket go any faster? Groaned Takahito, though he knew the answer. A similar conversation having occurred nearly every trip for a month. Takahito was up for his 4th doctorate, this time in xenobotany. His mind was constantly in gear, so much so that I doubted he ever slept for more than an hour or two at a stretch. He was descended from a long line of professionals based out of Koga Province, Japan. He was quiet, observant, and a man of impeccable integrity. He was fit, using a lot of his pent-up energy to practice his martial arts. Similar to me, though I valued sleep almost as much as I valued Stephanie. Two things he apparently did not. I think he might even be asexual. Unlike me, however, his hair was black while mine was sandy blonde. He had burnt amber eyes whilst mine were hazel, and I was Caucasian. Despite our differences, we were like brothers, even having been confused from one another at certain points. We were both some of the best martial artists on Rock Point, only a challenge to each other in a one-on-one fight. Neither was allowed to compete in the seasonal championships anymore. Jennifer, our pilot, was used to humoring all of us excessive thinkers. One of the reasons she was still our official pilot. She was a dark chocolate goddess, her short afro hair perfectly trimmed, a consummate professional through and through. She didn't even need to think about her response. She replied almost on autopilot.
You know they won't let me paint red-orange flames on the chassis,
was her dry response, alluding to an idea that flames appeared to make things go faster.
Really, Jin?
Our applied quantum cosmologist Kulan from Mongolia chuckled.
I would think that blue-white with yellow ghost flames would work better.
Kulan was a powerful and intelligent woman. She was just at home at a computer terminal as she was with a welding torch. She was the lead designer of the focusing aperture system for the trebuchet and had developed much of the systems to build and construct it. She was a bit shorter than average, but more than made up for it in sheer force of will and presence. Her long, smooth ebony hair was not braided and bound simply and reached the small of her back. Stephanie, not in on the conversation that led to this, crinkled her nose in confusion.
And what makes you say that, Lon?
Kulan shrugged as she gazed out in the direction of deep space.
O-type stars are the younger, and they have less metals in them than M-type dwarfs, and ghost flames are cool. But wouldn't paint increase drag?
Steph asked, forgetting that without air there was no drag.
Not in space,
Jennifer shrugged, flipping some switches.
Besides, everyone knows that flames make the vehicles go faster.
Green is the color of the fourth, or heart chakra.
And money,
Jen interjected.
But that is for another time. Ladies and gents, we are making our final approach. Please place your tray tables and seat backs in their full upright and locked positions.
The trebuchet was a lattice of pipes and cables on a chassis resembling a conical spider's web with the peak chopped off, pointed towards deep space. I found it amazing that such a cutting-edge piece of tech could look so innocuous. Like all humans, I couldn't help but admire the intrinsic beauty of the design, as chills ran down my spine. The Leif Erikson itself was a wonder in and of itself. It was a huge wing shape about 10 times the size of a long-range stealth bomber. Unlike a stealth craft, however, its color tone was high visibility white with super reflective yellow stripes to help distinguish important features of the craft against both the blinding white of the craft itself and the epic black of space. In anticipation of missing Ice Point, we had loaded the craft with about 2/3 of the projected needed materials to colonize a new world under realistic scenarios. Though it did have a vehicle bay in the ventral section of the craft with access from the port side, the doors were currently locked out for travel, so we used docking points on the starboard side of the dorsal section. As we approached one of the empty points, others having been used for the night shift, a shiver of excitement and anticipation with a pinch of dread rolled down my back. Alright people, remember we are dealing with extremely powerful and sensitive tech. Be careful. I suddenly felt the need to remind my team, though I knew they would be professional regardless of what I said.
As if we are ever not.
Steph started to scoff as she removed her seat harness and began to float towards the hatch, then saw my face.
Are you feeling alright? You look more pale than usual.
I don't know, Steph. The hairs on the back of my neck are tingling.
I'm getting an odd feeling too,
Jennifer affirmed as the docking cycle did its thing.
I'm no doc, but something feels off. Let's just get this thing going then, and there won't be any room for doubt in our minds,
Kulan assured.
We all have something to do, and we know what we are doing. Easy for you to say, I just drive the taxi, Jennifer scoffed. I am a fighter and test pilot that has over a decade of experience. I got nothing to do while you guys stare at blinky lights. At least I do get to sit in the pilot seat while you do your final engine test.
Taka was floating in front of the hatch, manipulating the controls to get through. Let's just get this day going. We met our night shift counterparts and received our turnover, then set about to work, each heading to our own locations. My place was in the control room. The room, like the rest of the craft, was a wonder of technological achievement. This room, reminiscent of the command deck of the starship Normandy without the intergalactic holomap of gaming fame, and the bridge of the Enterprise of movie and television fame combined. There were many stations for operators and technicians to monitor all of the craft's functions. We had been at it for a few hours, and as I began to set my mind to the task, the hackles on the back of my neck fell. It was getting close to the time to test the engines. At first, I was so distracted by the task of preparing that I didn't notice an alarm on the Solar Observatory station, but Vance managed to divert my attention. A supercharged CME warning is in effect for Sirius and surrounding areas, the neuter voice decreed. Good thing we aren't there, I muttered distractedly, silencing the alarm as I checked the dark energy response on the trebuchet. I floated between checking energy levels for a moment before Jennifer drifted in to take her position in the pilot's chair, but drifted by the solar observation post.
Steven, damn it, Neil!
The use of my middle name always snapped me out of any distraction, mostly because I rarely tell anybody my middle name.
Jennifer Lynn Ramsey!
I showed my aggravation by using her full name.
What is it? I'm busy! SMCE warning!
She pointed to the station.
Is there a reason you're ignoring the protection protocols?
Jen, I scoffed. It's not coming to Earth, it's going to sea. Oh, fucking shit. A mass coronal ejection, or coronal mass ejection, or fucking big solar flare, was very dangerous for electronics, especially in space, as it was usually accompanied by an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP. EMPs killed electronics by over-energizing all the circuits in the system. Usually it killed the entire device, but sometimes only part of the device's functions were affected, all depending on when it happened and during what subroutine. Most of the critical systems of the trebuchet and Erikson were hardened or shielded from such things, but it was expensive to do and not everything was shielded. Protection protocols involved shutting down what needed to be and placing other things in standby and other small, usually minuscule tasks that, when done in time, saved everything from damage. My distraction meant that we didn't have time. We both dropped everything and frantically began protocols for the Erikson and the trebuchet by remote. All stations prepare for SMCE, I called out on the general announcing circuit.
You know more about the trebuchet than I do. I can get the Erikson mostly set. You take care of the launcher.
We had no time. The flare hit and we weren't even remotely ready. Sometimes, in the middle of a shutdown, a system was most vulnerable, especially transmitters and receivers. Somehow, the trebuchet began its launch procedure, even though it should have been immediately shut down after losing comms with the Erikson, and we couldn't get comms back up.
We're so totally fucked, aren't we?
Jennifer fearfully asked. Get to the sticks. If we are launched, we may need you to drive if we still have time to react after the gate is passed. I returned, all fear truncated by cold hard survival logic. All stations prepare for launch and/or impact.
The darkness was absolute. The silence, nigh on unbearable. I only knew I wasn't dead because I could hear my heartbeat, weak though it was. The air was thinner than usual, and I could only partially fill my lungs. It was like I was made out of lead, and I tasted and smelled rust. What happened? I wasn't sure I was talking aloud, but my voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once. Or did it? The feeling was quite disorienting. but I had no time to try to concentrate. I had no idea how long I lay there, immobile, lightheaded and confused. At the time, I had no idea who I was, let alone what was going on or needed to be done. Eventually, a wisp of cognition coalesced, and I realized I was me, and mostly covered in debris from damaged control stations, connective conduit, etc. I suddenly realized I had the wherewithal to do something. I struggled meekly, to no avail. The long stretch with low gravity on Rock Point had weakened my muscles, not to mention, I couldn't figure out how to move. After a bit of struggle, I figured out that I was under a pile of debris. The low oxygen and low blood volume was wreaking havoc on my consciousness. Though I figured this much out, I couldn't understand what was going on. All I knew was that I was in deep shit. Not only was I having trouble coming to terms with what happened, I was finding it difficult to stay focused and really care in general. Nothing was making any sense. I had no idea what was needed, only that the situation was far from good. I weakly wriggled and pushed at the debris for what felt like days, but I was finally free. Now what? I asked, hoping the air had an answer. It didn't. I looked around. Faint light reached my eyes, but there was still no sound. Nothing made sense. The air was stagnant, cold, and tasting of metal. My whole being ached and throbbed, protesting even light breaths. Every movement I made was like being set on fire with chlorine tetrafluoride. Every thought that occurred to me was simultaneously hilarious, burdened, and agony. Is what insanity be? I wandered to the cavern of my mind. Or deadened? In the deepest, darkest, most inaccessible and inhospitable part of my brain, I knew that the others might have survived or needed to be helped, but somehow I knew that if I didn't get to life support and got it going, wouldn't matter or what was happening. Somehow, I had to remember to get to the machinery room and get there and something soon. The control room never felt so big. It was all I could do to keep going. Vaguely, I realized my right leg wasn't working. I wasn't even crawling. It was more like slithering up a hill against a current. Since when is gravity? My grasp of words was quickly leaving, but it was undeniable that we were planetside. We get Ishtar? My attempt to stand reminded my addled brain that my leg wasn't working. I stared at the gaping wound covered in congealed blood with bits of contamination, with kind of weird curiosity. I knew it was my leg, but I could not feel it, and that was probably a good thing, considering. Wow, minced pie, I chuckled as if I made a joke. What's blood lost? Eventually, I remembered I had to fix something and started towards the entrance again. A sudden shot of pain reminded me that I couldn't walk. Leg first, then ship. Making the decision aloud made it more real, more concrete. After waves of dizziness, I began my slithering once more. I knew there was an aid station just past the door, if I could remember to breathe on my trip. Between bouts of confusion, fatigue, and overwhelming pain and determination, I just kept inching towards the door. My focus faded in and out, yet I still managed to make forward progress somehow. All in all, it was only the idea of needing to get to that something that kept me going. After ages of tortured travel across barren and inhospitable foreign landscape, I made it to the medical station and fumbled with the latches until its contents spilled on the floor. The jump scare of medicine distracted me further as I tried to figure out what the stuff was. But eventually I remembered I had to fix something. The only good thing about suffering from hypoxia shock and exsanguination was that I could no longer feel any pain, and my body was like a practice cadaver. The task of meatball surgery on my own flesh focused me a little, but my cold hands and addled brain didn't make it easy at all. Finally, it was cleaned and bound. Looks like the work of a first-gear mortician. I was unexpectedly coherent. With no hot and light, do it will. I had found some painkillers, stimulants, and assorted other pills and shots. Without any clue that there could be consequences, I downed them all that I could and shot up like an addict, probably missing all the veins in the process. The trip to the mechanical decks was slightly easier, but I was fading faster than before. All I could think about was getting there, though at times I forgot where or why. Only after an eternity, I made it to the mechanical room of the station and melted into the chair. In front of me was a control board with flashing lights and buzzers. The whole panel begged for attention I literally could not give. What for all night lights? I only knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what or how. Randomly, I pressed buttons and switches, no longer even able to hope I was doing the right thing. As lights changed and noises faded, my brain lost all ability to function normally. Slowly, the world faded into darkness, then nothing. There was light and heat. Someone and/or something moved around me. As I labored back to consciousness, I realized I wasn't freezing, and soon noted that my hypoxia was eased as well. Even though my whole body ached, and my leg throbbed, my ribs burned, and my head just plain hurt. Black faded to gray, which gave way to white as I blinked rapidly and opened my eyes. I asked of Stephanie as her eyes lit up with recognition that I was awake. I realized her face was bandaged and she had a brace on her wrist, but she was not hooked up to all manner of machines that I was. She was definitely better off. "Oh, Steve, no, you're not dead," she smiled, luckily able to speak Irish. "But you did take some major blows to the head and the hypoxia and whatnot. Can you still speak English? It took me a while, but finally my English vocabulary took hold. Is it too much to ask that we made it to Ice Point? Ishtar is half the size of Mars, and we are at 1 1/4 Earth gravity. No known planet is that massive, in Sol at least." Her smile faded. "We are lost, with no hope of being found, or getting home on our own." For the longest time, she just manipulated the medical equipment. "I don't know how you survived. The rest of us managed to strap onto crash chairs, but low oxygen prevented us from waking up. Yet, somehow, with a swollen brain, low blood volume, every one of your bones is either hairlined or cracked and shattered outright. You should be dead. I'm so glad you're not. But the Erikson is the only thing keeping you alive right now." "The others?" "Better off than you. And since you can't do anything, I won't bore you with the details." "Any clue where we are?" "Best we can figure, it's a rogue planet in interstellar space, at least 100 light years from Earth, though we can't really be certain. Not about the last part, at least." "Well, I always heard Nifleheim was a must-see before one dies."